year 1863, Peter is employed as a slave on a cotton plantation along with his spouse Dodian and offspring. Upon receiving news that he has been sold to a different proprietor, he spends his final moments with his family in prayer until the Caucasian men arrive to forcefully take him away, disregarding the pleas of his children. Despite Peter's attempts to resist by shouting and struggling against their grip, the men point their firearm at Dodian, causing Peter to cease his resistance and comply by boarding the cart under his own volition. Regrettably, the men seek revenge and proceed to strike him despite dragging him once again. Peter and several other slaves are transported like livestock in a cage. As they depart, Peter vows to his weeping children that he will return for them someday. After a prolonged journey, they reach their new labor destination, which happens to be the construction site of a railroad. The working conditions here are far worse than those on the plantations. The heads of disobedient slaves adorn the entrance as a warning. The slaves sleep in cages. And even when they work hard and behave, the white masters resort to physical abuse and verbal insults. To make matters worse, the masters justify their actions with quotes from the Bible. Feral dogs roam the area and are unleashed upon any slave attempting to flee. If a slave misbehaves, they may be whipped or even shot on the spot in the field, and sometimes the boss Fassel brands them on the face. Fassel has two men at his side, Harrington and Knowles, the latter of whom was purchased as a slave but became part of the guards due to his hunting prowess. Peter tries his best to comply, but when he tries to assist his friend Gordon, who has fallen, he is reprimanded for doing anything other than work. One evening, after the slaves are sent back to their cage, they watch John being thrown inside while writhing in pain from his branded cheek. A slave named Tomas trembles in fear, and Peter tries to comfort him by reminding him of his loved ones and encouraging him to think of their plight as just work. Peter also offers the word of God, who is always watching over them, but John scoffs at him, asserting that God does not care for them. Despite the taunt, Peter remains calm and promises to pray for John. Later, Peter overhears two white guards discussing some significant news. Lincoln has liberated the slaves, and those who managed to escape are seeking refuge in Baton Rouge. The conversation is abruptly halted when a guard notices Tomas's error with the food and intends to punish him. Peter comes to his defense, explaining that he is just a child. The guard strikes him and draws his gun, ready to kill Peter for his insolence. But Fassel intervenes because he is intrigued by Peter's demeanor. Later, when Peter is back in the cage, Fassel approaches him and declares himself to be Peter's god and Peter to be his dog. Peter retorts that if that is the case, he should be fed the same meat as the dogs. In that particular moment, Fassel simply laughed. However, the very next day, he took Peter captive, restrained him with chains, and forced him to kneel before him while his dog growled and barked ferociously just inches away from Peter. The dog had now memorized Peter's scent. During lunchtime, Peter revealed to the other slaves that Lincoln and Baton Rouge could be reached within 5 days of walking through the swamp. Although some were hesitant due to the difficulty of surviving the swamps, Peter convinced a few men by reminding them that they would not survive in their current situation either. The group awaited the opportune moment to escape. Sometime later, a slave died while working, and the guards ordered Peter to drag the body to the pit where they threw all the corpses. There were some white deserters who were supposed to be digging, but when they saw Peter, they insisted that a black man should do it instead. Consequently, Peter ended up filling the pit with a shovel. This was the perfect opportunity for him to execute his plan. He waited patiently for the guards to be distracted by an explosion on the field and then attacked them with the shovel, stole a knife, and ran away. The other slaves and deserters followed his lead, hitting a few guards on their way out. John was even able to steal a gun. However, the guards started shooting at the runners and killed many of them before they could escape. Fassel was infuriated that Peter got away and called for Harrington, Knowles, and the dogs to chase after him. Peter teamed up with 3 of his friends and navigated through the forest while listening out for any dangers. They eventually reached the swamps, but Tomas froze at the sight of the crocodiles, allowing the dogs to catch up with him. Fassel made Tomas an offer to let him go if he revealed where the others were headed. Tomas confessed, and Fassel let him go. However, Fassel shot him as soon as he turned around and let the crocodiles devour him. Meanwhile, Peter, John, and Gordon crossed the swamp safely. Peter suggested that they continue through the other swamps, but John wanted to take the horse trail and felt safe with the gun he had stolen. Gordon wanted to follow Peter, but Peter suggested that they split up to make it harder for Fassel to track them. Gordon decided to follow the sound of Lincoln's cannons. Peter took his own path and later discovered that he had been shot in the leg. He needed to address the wound before the dogs could smell the blood, but first, he had to run to create distance between him and Fassel. Soon after, Peter came across a white family's home that owned slaves. He tied a vine around his leg as a makeshift tourniquet and hid behind a pile of logs. He snatched some water from the pump and stole a shirt from the clothesline, risking his life. However, one of the family's children saw him and rang a bell, alerting everyone. Fassel followed the noise and learned from the family which direction Peter had fled. Peter ran as fast as he could, using the stolen shirt as a bandage for his wound. He then hid the bloodied shirt in a trunk, which the dogs later found, and submerged himself in the swamp water. Fassel and his men fell for the trick and made their way down the road, believing that Peter had crossed the swamp. Peter emerged from the water after they had passed, only to be attacked by a crocodile. He quickly pushed it away with a branch and killed it with his knife. At that particular moment, Dodian awakens from a terrifying dream in which she witnessed her spouse in peril. The children also awaken, concerned about their father, but Dodian assures them that he is alive and will return soon since he has survived things that no other man could. As night falls, Peter hides atop a tree and employs his knife to remove swamp leeches from his body, causing some blood to drip onto the plants surrounding him. Meanwhile, Fassel and his group stumble upon a dead crocodile and dissect it, only to find it empty, indicating that Peter escaped through there. The group decides to set up camp for the night and feast on the crocodile, prompting Harrington to compliment Peter for his skills. However, Fassel rebukes him and recalls the lesson his father taught him: if you give black people even a small thing, they will demand more and take things like their jobs and lands. The next morning, Peter continues to run while ensuring that his body remains covered in mud and animal excrement, which attracts flies but helps mask his scent. While crossing another swamp, he thinks about his family and prays to his Lord to keep the beast's fear at bay. When the sun suddenly shines upon him, he perceives it as a sign. While Fassel divides his group to cover more ground, Peter is fortunate to discover an abandoned treehouse with clean water and some leftover food. The treehouse also has hot coals, which Peter uses to heat up his knife to cauterize his leg wound. He then places the coals in an empty bucket and takes them with him as he climbs a tree to blow the smoke at a beehive, causing the bees to scatter and allowing Peter to collect some honey. Fassel spots the smoke and races towards it, but Peter is already on his way out. The treehouse also contains a boat that a snake is using as its hiding place, so Peter cautiously pushes it away with a branch before hopping into the boat and sailing away as he relishes the taste of the honey. Meanwhile, Dodian is approached by her master, who informs her that he has sold her and she will depart in 2 days. Her children are not permitted to accompany her since her new master will provide her with a new husband. Deeply hurt by the news, Dodian still wishes to wait for her husband's return and makes a rather drastic decision to avoid being sold. She approaches one of the cotton production machines and inserts her hand inside, feigning an accident. Back to Fassel. His dog's nose leads him to the treehouse, allowing him to track Peter's direction as he crosses the river. Peter hurries to enter the woods, where he is astonished to encounter John once more, who is enraged since the white men will now pursue him as well. Peter assures him that he is not being followed and teaches John how to conceal his scent, but John disregards his advice, and they both resume running. Moments later, they hear the dogs barking and rush to hide, with Peter entering an empty trunk and John climbing to the top of a tree. Despite John's efforts to conceal his scent, the dogs eventually track him down, allowing Fassel and his men to find him quickly. John refuses to come down, so Fassel shoots him, causing him to fall, before demanding information on Peter through violent means, but John still refuses to talk. Fassel decides to take John's head and give it to Harrington and Knowles as a message to take back to camp. Peter shuts his eyes to avoid witnessing his friend's demise and says a prayer for John's soul. After waiting a few hours to put some distance between himself and Fassel, Peter emerges from the trunk during the rain and discovers how they killed John, which shakes him to his core. Breathing heavily, he forces himself to continue until he sees a group of horses running by, one of which is on fire. Peter follows their path and finds a plantation house, but it's ablaze and all the white people are dead. The slaves heard the news of Lincoln's proclamation and took matters into their own hands. Peter enters the house with his knife out, walks through the rooms, and finally comes across the dining table. Throwing caution to the wind, he feasts on the food and wine until he hears a strange sound from upstairs. He investigates and discovers a dying girl stuck under a harp, which she plays as a plea for help. Peter rescues her and takes her outside, placing her on a table before attempting to fetch water. The girl is scared and gives him her cross pendant, which Peter takes, promising God's presence. Distracted, Peter doesn't hear Harrington approaching until it's too late. He drops his knife and steps away from the girl to avoid being shot. The girl dies, and Peter is furious, using the cross to violently kill Harrington. Knowles arrives, and Peter shoots him with Harrington's weapon. Knowles tries to reason with Peter, saying that Fassel may accept someone who can kill a crocodile into his ranks, but Peter calls him the worst kind and leaves him to die. Hearing Fassel approaching, Peter runs into the cotton fields for cover and shoots the barking dog that alerts Fassel to his location. The next morning, Peter arrives at a beach filled with the bodies of white men who died during confrontations against Lincoln's army. Despite the lack of provisions, he sees the ships in the distance and hears the cannons indicating Lincoln's men are close. Excited at the prospect of freedom, Peter starts running but is knocked down by a horse. Fassel offers Peter some meat and asks him to beg, but Peter refuses. Fassel draws his gun, reminding Peter that he's his god, but someone else shoots Fassel before he can pull the trigger. Peter meets his saviors, Lincoln's native guard led by Lieutenant Caillou, before collapsing from exhaustion and hunger. The soldiers take him to the infirmary tent at their camp in Baton Rouge, where the nun nurse makes him rest due to his infected leg wound. For several days, Peter dreams about his family, and when he feels better, he obtains new papers as a free man from one of the soldiers. However, he must fabricate some details like his age, which he doesn't know. Regrettably, he is not permitted to depart and seek out his family just yet. The white soldiers are exploiting the fact that the slaves are technically considered stolen contraband and offer them two options: toil on federal farms or enlist in the army. Peter declines to continue following orders. But when the soldier suggests that joining the army could aid him in rescuing his family and securing his freedom, Peter agrees to join. Later on, Peter learns that the army has also found Gordon, who is alive but injured. Peter is pleased to see him but is pained to inform him about John. Then Peter heads to Kalu to obtain his uniform. However, before he can do so, he is asked if he would be interested in assisting the cause by posing for something called a photograph. Peter is hesitant, but Kalu assures him that the white photographers are harmless and have good intentions. It turns out that these men are taking pictures of the reality of slavery to inform the world, and Peter consents to show his bare back to the camera, exposing the scars of hundreds of whippings. Next, Peter is taken to see the general, who inquires about all the information he may have concerning the railroad that the enemy is constructing. After Peter shares all of the intel he has, the general stares at his picture and points out that those scars indicate disobedience, which is not a desirable quality to have in the army. Kalu tries to take Peter away, but Peter defends himself, explaining that those scars indicate he has been beaten many times but has never ceased fighting, which is also essential for a soldier. At dawn, Kalu takes Peter and all his soldiers to the trenches, where he reminds them that they are fighting for freedom with a heartfelt speech. Many soldiers fall to enemy fire while still marching, but the group does not allow it to deter them and joins the fight without hesitation. Soon they are surrounded by fire, and Peter is hit by an explosion, rendering him unconscious in a puddle for a few minutes. As soon as he wakes up, he drags his aching body through the mud to continue assisting, firing at the enemy whenever he has the opportunity and offering blessings to any dying comrades he encounters. Kalu falls in battle, and eventually Peter finds a wounded Gordon as well. Seeing his friend in so much agony and terror inspires him to emerge from his hiding place and run toward the enemy lines. His goal is to halt the cannons, and with the help of all the soldiers who view him as an inspiration and follow him, the native guard overcomes their enemies and achieves victory. Now that the war is over, the army visits every plantation to free the slaves. When they arrive at the house where Peter used to work, everyone is stunned, unable to believe the news. However, happiness soon replaces their shock when they finally comprehend that freedom is actually real. After witnessing his former master die at the hands of justice, Peter begins searching for his family. He nearly has a breakdown when he is unable to locate them. However, when he begins to pray under his breath, he glances to his side and allows God to guide him to his wife and children, who run to him and embrace him with joy. The photograph of the real Peter became an iconic part of history and traveled the world many times over. Thanks to Lincoln's proclamation in 1863, over 400,000 black people escaped to freedom. By 1865, almost 4 million slaves in America had been recognized as free.